Ludwig Prien. De Domine invocatoris, si non sanctificatus es, cave. De vermis mysteriis non absolvo folem legendum fatum et eum versus. Tibi magnum innominandum signa stellarum nigrarum et Juan Luis Jorge, De Bibliotheca. Reflections on the power of the verb in certain texts. Archaeos Publications, 1919, Stafford.
Translation does not alter the occult power contained within such forbidden texts. The malevolent energy is in no way diminished. The spell must be cast aloud and clearly, in certain languages or little-known dialects. Maglafach Fathang. The reader will understand that, in the light of these revelations, I would be foolhardy to continue quoting from the text I have before me. If spoken aloud in its entirety, it would surely awaken powerful and malignant forces. I will go further and say that simple reading of some of the more technical passages describing specific practices is in itself a perilous exercise. The ill-prepared reader can easily fall prey to attacks of demented hysteria, not unlike those described in cases of individuals said to be possessed by evil spirits. I recommend the study made by Zempf, Urbain, Grandier, and Loudon, and the reports made by the Reverend Richard Price concerning a number of astonishing, to say the least, exorcisms carried out in a parish near Providence. Given what I have written, we must be grateful to the librarians of the British Museum, who have never allowed consultation of the work of Al-Azib's startling work, the infamous Necronomicon. Copies of that work do exist, in spite of the zeal of book-burning inquisitors. For proof, we need look no further than the British Museum, of course, and the sealed archives of the Miskatonic University in Arkham. Other examples of books whose evil can be unleashed by any thoughtless reader are von Jutz's von Unersprechlichen Kulten and the abominable De Vermis Mysteries by Ludwig Prien, whose sordid death should be a lesson to all those tempted by a study of the occult.
The Sacrificial Dagger, Otto Stern, Lumina Books.
The importance placed on ritual sacrifice is constant in religious cult practice. Propitiating the gods is a theme common to many religions. The Old Testament affords many examples. Primitive polytheistic belief systems integrate sacrifice in their rituals as part of the recurrent process of reaffirmation and, naturally enough, group cohesion. The members of their social and religious community come together in an act of purification and atonement. It would be erroneous to imagine the act of human sacrifice linking priest, offering, and God, C.F. Manzetti, stone cults, as anything less than a vital focusing of the group's faith. The act also ensures the continuing appeasement of the god, but only if practiced by a recognized officiating priest using the appropriate instrument. Studies made concerning primitive religious groups bear witness to the central role of sacrifice in living ritual. My own work in the field of ethnopsychology brought me into contact with a sorcerer living in the region of Arkham. He introduced me to the rite of steel, linked to a ceremony known as adoring the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs. The god being adored is known as the vagabond. Here, the dagger's role, which allows the life breath to pass from one dimension to another, is essential. The vagabond is a frightening figure, being able to move where he wants and to kill those who have displeased the goat god, for whom he acts as a go-between. The goat is clearly a fertility god. The priest, having spoken the invocation, must choose the appropriate dagger for the sacrifice. The knife with a sinusoidal blade that must be dipped 7 times, on night when the moon is full, in water that has been distilled 100 times, will be laid aside, since it would send the vagabond back into his own dimension. See illustration. The priest will rather choose the dagger with a curved blade. That is more appropriate for slitting of the lamb's throat. This act transfigures the sorcerer priest and plunges the assembled worshippers into a divine trance.
The Book of Yael, Signs of Stone, Eucharistic Rituals of Forbidden Cults. Texts collated by Monsignor Vacher, Legate in the Curia of the Vatican.
Numerous devilish cults speak of monstrous creatures called the Old Ones. These supernatural beings are believed to be possessed of powers equivalent to those of the gods of antique religions. Adepts of such cults refer to forbidden literature in order to cause these frightful entities to appear before them. What serious student of folk myths has not come across the names of Cthulhu and Shub-Niggurath? It must be said that these creatures wield tremendous power and are difficult to control once they have been unleashed into the world. Those who serve He who goes in shadows protect themselves with signs of stone, carved into the walls of houses or engraved on various objects. For those misguided servants of evil, the best protection appears to be that afforded by the sign of the most ancient gods, engraved in Manar stone, a heavy material said to be disagreeable to the touch. The sinful practices of those who fall into such errors can only lead to the darkest of despair, and are a mortal danger to the soul. Such monsters as those invoked by these foolhardy individuals are engendered when reason drops its guard. Man is easily tempted into perversion. It is why we must forever remain alert and renounce Satan with each breath we take. His ways are infinite in number.
If Rocks Could Talk, or The Story of a Louisiana Plantation by the Marquise de Chamfray.
After the criminal selling off of Florida by the foul usurper, my father elected to remain in this inhospitable land, where we were free at least to express our royalist feelings, and hope our country would come to its senses. In 1818, a certain Pickford bought up Ledoux's land, after the poor fellow had ruined himself in unfortunate speculation. Pickford soon turned out to be the most loathsome human we had ever encountered. He was an adventurer of the worst kind, nouveau riche, and bloated with a grotesque sense of self-importance. First came the incessant army of men with shovels, digging into the mountain of earth that was to fill in the surrounding swamp. The undertaking was quite stupendous. We learned from a slave that the final objective was to connect the existing caves with another one of gigantic proportions. Racked by a mania of persecution, Elia Pickford constantly fired his workers and hired new ones. He did all he could to keep anyone from learning about his plans. My father was amused and said, "The poor fool will end up getting lost in his own cave." The walls went up, and tongues started wagging. Our detestable neighbor had been a sailor, a ruffian grown rich on questionable trade. Distasteful stories were told of him. When the work was finished, Pickford invited us to the opening of his rambling mansion, which he named Derceto. My father asked what the strange name meant. Pickford answered, "Derceto reminds me of Astarte, the fertility goddess. Around here, the name is Shub-Niggurath. I believe that a name so steeped in evil should be said aloud came as not such a shock to my father, as he himself confided in me some while later. We left immediately. In June of 1862, Derceto was burned down in unexplained circumstances. It was undoubtedly the deed of some jealous Yankee or another. It was amazing to watch the servants rushing into the flames to try and save their bullet-riddled master. After that terrible night, Derceto fell into ruin. Its blackened walls were soon overgrown, as human-built works always are, by ever-present nature. In 1875, the property was eventually bought by a gentleman whose name was Howard Hartwood. I was sorry that my father, who delighted in fine conversation, was no longer alive to enjoy the company of this new neighbor. Learned and well-versed in history, he had made a particular study of piracy. It was Hartwood who told me that Pickford had commanded a ship that flew the flag of piracy. That explained the scoundrel's great wealth. Hartwood was fascinated by Pickford and undertook a great deal of research in an attempt to find some treasures that he was convinced the pirate had hidden. He went through the ruins inch by inch. He then had the burnt-out house rebuilt exactly as it had been, and refurbished the library that had miraculously escaped the flames on the night of the Great Fire. Hartwood set about studying every volume in that library, and often talked to me of his research. He was a handsome widower, deeply attached to his son Jeremy, who was later to become a professional artist. Hartwood worked incessantly, first from the room I offered him, then from his own freshly restored home, which he rebaptized Derceto. I imagine he hoped to enlist the help of the god of good fortune in his treasure hunt. As far as I have ever been able to tell, all his searching came to nothing. There were no lost treasure to be found at Derceto. I learned of Hartwood's death while I was in Paris, but That, as they say, is another story.
Unfinished Chapter of Terra Incognita by Jacob van Ostade, a hitherto unpublished fragment of the manuscript unearthed following indications furnished in the Vatican Library's Expurgatory Index.
In those icy and unwelcoming lands, the rites of wizards and healers are deeply rooted in ancient legend. Mysterious and cruel beings are thought to have ruled over the Arctic plains in times past. A cursed city, enclosed by massive walls, is believed to stand to this day. It contains fabulous treasures, and is inhabited by the degenerate descendants of those who instilled centuries of terror in the hearts of the people. These people, naturally placid, are seized with rage and horror at the very mention of the prisoners of the ice. Were these dreadful captives to be freed from their frozen cells, they would reap a horrifying tribute of human flesh. These blood-curdling beings may be invoked by certain ritual words. They can even be controlled, albeit with the greatest of difficulty. I admit to being impressed by these tales, repeated to me on many occasions and in a number of different places during my travels in the region. I have also seen troubling cult objects, sculpted in a material unknown to me. Another remarkable fact is that local Eskimos experience great distaste in pronouncing certain words, and invariably avoid saying them. Here is a living example of the power that words contain. As it is said in the Bible, in the beginning was the Word.
The Sons of the Sun and of the Shadows. Lieutenant Lope de Vega's account of his astounding travels to the land of the Aztecs.
"Holy Christ!" cried Captain Cortez, astonished by the strange rite we beheld. We found the savages half naked. They were throwing balls of silver and gold at each other. They laughed as if demented, clearly maddened by some heathen drug. And yet, should one of them fail to catch the ball thrown in his direction, the poor devil was seized and dragged off to be sacrificed in their temple. As we discovered, this frightful game was a ritual most holy to them, and symbolized the movement of the heavenly bodies. The dropping of a ball foretold a catastrophe. That is what the Aztecs believed, in their godless ignorance. Their countless deities could only be appeased through endless human sacrifices. The victim's heart, which was still beating, lay in the hand of the murderous priest. The interior of the temple was surprisingly cool. The weight of our armor, our exhaustion, even the burden of our suffering, they were all banished by a sense of awe that the crudely magnificent altar instilled. In the tomb-like silence, a deep voice chanted an incantation. The majestic statue of the water goddess, Chalchihuitlicue, seemed to throb with vitality. This massive stone, draped in a golden cloak, and studded with precious stones, was coming to life before our very eyes. Horror of horrors! The granite eyes of the statue, empty of life only moments before, were now injected with blood. We staggered back in amazement. Dom Jose was taken by a fit of convulsions. He tried to raise up his crucifix, as if to ward off an attack by demons. The heathen priest laughed cruelly. The statue's mouth cracked open in a deathly grin, bearing teeth sharpened to dagger points. Captain Cortez cried, "Attack!" But it was no use. We were glued to the spot. We were unable to move. Our armor seemed to be bolted to the temple floor. Our legs weakened, and we collapsed in a thunder of steel. Only Cortez had the presence of mind to unsheath his dagger. He hurled it at the cackling priest. 4 inches of the finest Toledo steel buried itself in the heathen's face. His blood spurted, splashing the now lifeless idol. We picked ourselves up with difficulty. Never will I forget that terrible moment. My companions, naturally enough, told tales of devilish enchantments cast upon our armor. Whatever the truth of that, I could not deny that the supreme god of the fourth universe had treated us as mere playthings. I am convinced that a terrible energy is yet contained within that heathen statue. A power strong enough to change a proud conquistador into a helpless puppet. Drawing of Chalchihuitlicue by Dom Jose de la Sierra, done before the destruction of the Aztec temple of Tenochtitlan.
Fragments of the Book of Abdul.
In the antique city of dead Relaya, Cthulhu dreams and waits. In the pit of time, the unspeakable lies in wait. That is not dead which can eternal lie. Relaya, your blocks of stone seal the ritual that gives birth to fear. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! Let he who knows how to invoke the stones act. It is time. Let the shadow of Cthulhu darken the sky. May the servitor of the black goat of the woods with 1,000 youngs sound his flute in honor of the unspeakable. Cthulhu Fatang! Cthulhu Fatang! Ayah! Ayah! May he who may not be named cast his withering gaze upon the unbeliever, for he is the door, the key, and the guardian of the door, and holds you now in his immense power.
The Tale of Captain J.W. Norton of the Army of the Union.
1862. The South was in collapse. Louisiana was open to us. I had each day to requisition victuals for our troops, and was aided in this endeavor by a score of brave men. Rebels were not yet ready to lay down their arms. The region was far from safe. I headed further and further west, and questioned many freed slaves. From them, I learned of a plantation on the coast. Its name was Derceto. We received a less than hearty welcome. Only Pickford, the owner, behaved in a friendly manner. While my men counted cattle and grain reserves, I learned what I could from him. Man was most unusual and possessed an extraordinarily cultured mind. At nightfall, I gave orders for the men to bivouac at Derceto. Pickford invited my second-in-command, Lieutenant Patterson, and myself to dine. And our host proved a most entertaining conversationalist. While coffee was being served, Patterson went to inspect the men's camp. The cigar Pickford offered me was so acrid that my head began to spin. I remembered campfire tales of fellow officers trapped by devilish Confederate tricks. My mind floated in a foul and dense fog, from which emerged the enlarged and deformed face of Pickford. He grinned at me. Patterson's return chased off the nightmare. I heard shouts and firing from outside, and found the strength to take out my revolver. I fired 3 shots. Pickford fell to the floor. Patterson then helped me out of the burning house. The air was filled with smoke. We resembled a company in disorderly retreat. I saw slaves leaping into the flames of that inferno. They were trying to save Pickford's life.
Memories by Alistair Boleskine. Printed in London, A. Machin, editor, 1833.
It was during a conversation with G that one first heard of the New England fishing village of I. The area was apparently the ideal place from which to witness unusual phenomena in space. The quality of the air, along with the conjunction of several favorable factors, made one impatient to get started. Having gleaned what information one could from the British Museum, one set off with all haste. One's work on space and comets in particular had met with a warm response, and one thought it judicious to include several original sketches of the phenomenon, sketches which one felt were sure to arouse a great deal of keen interest in the scientific circles of 1834. One refers naturally to the passage of Halley's comet.
Editor's note: Lord Boleskine's memoirs end at this point. Who knows what extraordinary contributions he might still have made had he not succumbed during his visit to New England to dementia, followed by an early death in St. Andrew's Hospital.